maybe particularly wind power and anything that's cleaner than the stuff we have now.
Okay, great.
I'm Gail Williamson. I'm here from Santa Cruz, California. I work at the public access television station. I am completely against all fossil fuel, want only renewable. Monterey Bay, where I am from, is sitting on a huge amount of oil, and they want to frack there.
Okay, great, thank you. Wallace and I are both volunteers with the Sierra Club, with the Beyond Coal team. We each have some other experiences beyond that, but that's the major background setup for this. And in terms of the presentations here, I'm going to talk more about where we're at, what got us here in fossil fuels, and then Wallace will talk about more moving to the future and clean energy. So hopefully we'll move from the depressing to more about grounds for optimism in terms of where we can go in the future here. So I'm primarily talking about moving beyond fossil fuels here. Oh, can you advance? Is that a remote to advance over here?
Apparently not. I'm glad coming in.
Okay, next one. Well, I'm sure everybody here at least knows that we're faced with climate change issues, and what that means is higher temperatures, the droughts like we had especially last year here, and actually not just here, but much of the country, especially in the Midwest area. Oceans are getting hotter, but not only that, they're getting more acidic. The melting ice caps, which not only means that the sea levels are rising, but in addition, the temperature is warm, that the oceans rise because of that as well, and the CO2 also changes. Okay, that's fine. Next one, Wallace. Is that it? No, it's not moving beyond. Go ahead, click it again. Some of these are doing screwy things in terms of not showing the. Go ahead. Okay, or was that? I'm sorry, was the previous one? Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. What else that means for us in terms of climate change is ecological catastrophes for a number of reasons in terms of what we're doing. Not just warming, but the storms, the changes in precipitation, all sorts of things where plants can't adapt readily enough to changing circumstances. There's a lot of storm damage, which not only wreaks havoc in the cities and to us as people, but out in the environmental areas when such as hurricanes and stuff like that. We lost the full screen. Okay. Crap. No,
It's really determined to go to the wrong one. That's
just do slideshow again and we'll go start from the beginning. No?
That's it.
Nope.
Don't
resume, just go back.
That's up there.
Or just double click on the slide that's there.
It's
See
determined to go to the wrong one. That's the slide you want.
Yeah, see if
No.
down.
No,
Is
it's
there
right
something
down
at the
here.
bottom? Equipment gremlins today.
Uh-huh.
Economic disruptions. I mean, there is so much we're dependent on, especially with our power supply, for what occurs in this world with banking and our communications and everything else, that these storms and what will cause and other problems and changes in the food supply and so on are going to cause a lot of huge economic disruptions. We are so intertwined that even just the markets, as they get nervous and so on, will react perhaps more strongly than need be, but still they will react very strongly. So we're looking at huge catastrophic problems in this area, and also disease problems. I mean, we're already seeing changes about insects coming here to Wisconsin that wouldn't have thrived here previously, things that may change over time in terms of diseases that will happen just because of changes in climate and the atmosphere that they're in, the way the oceans are, that things may evolve in ways we can't anticipate and cause problems that we're not prepared to deal with. Just as, for instance, some of the changes we're doing to drugs right now or with crops, with making them resistant to certain herbicides or antibiotics is causing problems to humans. Next one, please. Certainly locally here, we've had a number of climate change impacts that are occurring in Wisconsin and elsewhere. We are seeing changes, for instance, in when we see the native plants blooming in the spring and how late our first frost is in the fall. The real issue here is there's really urgency, and this is probably actually from some years ago, that was talked about 10 years to make the change. I mean, really, we have to make the change starting now and starting in a dramatic way, or we are already seeing the effects of climate change, so I'm not even sure the 10 years is valid anymore. It's like we need to do things as quickly and as rapidly as we can. Next. What we have right now with fossil fuels places at risk in a number of ways. First of all, we rely a lot on power grids, and we have centralized power plants. Storms will bring down the power lines, so even though the power plants may be okay, we can't distribute the power. Or some catastrophic event happens, like in Japan with the tsunami, the power plants can go out, and again, you have an area that is really dependent upon those because of our centralized structures. Fossil fuels are becoming more expensive, despite the fact that, of course, they're saying, oh, this is cheap, this is the way for the future, clean energy is too expensive, and so on. Here in Wisconsin, one issue is we don't have any fossil fuels. Our closest tie is the frac sands that we have for the fracking elsewhere. So, we don't even get any direct economic benefit. Not that that's a reason we should want to use fossil fuels. We also don't account for the true cost of fossil fuels. There are so many externalities in terms of health and environmental damage that we don't account for that are increasingly in risk over time. The predominant one that we talk about is climate change. And really, in terms of that, what they're doing and how they're taking it is that they're taking people on the planet as externalities. I don't know how you feel about that, but I don't think I'm an externality, and there's no planet B that I'm aware of for us to go to.
Our life support system's in danger.
Yeah, in so many ways and from so many parts. I mean, and we may lose parts of it, as well as smaller parts, as well as more massive sections. This is just indicating where we've been at, sort of up to this point, about some energy production by sources. You can see fossil fuels are very high, nuclear power is fairly low, as is renewable energy. But renewable energy is climbing. Nuclear power is on the decline. We just had a plant shut down earlier this year up north in Wisconsin. I just heard about another one going to be shut down out east. I think it was Virginia, if I recall correctly. By source, you can see that, and this is from 2011, natural gas overall is #1 over coal. Although coal is more pollution, we still use a lot of crude oil, and then it goes down. And as you can see, other renewable, just to get a sense of where it is in the scheme of things right now, is very low, while it's climbing rapidly. On the one on the right, again, you can see that in terms of energy, electricity production, that coal and natural gas are high. Coal is coming down somewhat. Natural gas is very much on the incline right now. And crude oil.
Is that in USA, those figures?
Yeah.
I thought coal was more like 33% or 35%.
This is off the slide.
That's correct for electricity generation. This slide may be total energy.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just was trying to find some graphics quickly that displayed some of the stuff, and I couldn't find everything I wanted precisely. But anyhow, where we're at currently is you can see that bottom there on the right that renewable energy is climbing rapidly even here in this country, but it's still way down there, while natural gas, at least so far, has been climbing very rapidly too in the recent past. And coal's starting to come down. Next. Energy consumption by source. Is that? Okay. Difference here is that the consumption overall, you can see petroleum is #1, but if you add natural gas and coal together, the issue is that's actually higher than petroleum use overall. Petroleum is more connected to cars.
When we say petroleum, does that mean oil?
Yeah. Yeah, oil products. But you can see there's a decline in that more recently, and that may well be due probably to the efficiency, increased efficiency of vehicles, and also, yeah, in this case, it'd just be the efficiency. Next one. Overall, where we're at in terms of renewable energy, this just gives you a pretty good idea and breaks it out for renewable energy, where you can see most of it is in historical terms of hydropower or various sorts of biomass. That wind, this is actually 2010, so it's been changing somewhat from then, but you can see especially solar has been very low at that point. Okay, emissions from sources. You know, if you add again coal and natural gas together, they are higher in petroleum. The emissions by fossil fuel type gives you an idea for electric generation still, and this was 2006, so again, that has changed somewhat for natural gas would be increasing and coal decreasing somewhat in terms of electric generation, but again, this is the emissions here. So that would probably be more split between coal and natural gas. Petroleum, you can see, is a predominant portion of the transportation sector, and then you can see it's mixed in industrial and residential. It uses a fair amount of natural gas for heating and commercial. Next one. There were supposed to be references here. Again, those aren't showing up, but talk about the true cost of fossil fuel. There was a study by the famous Harvard study by Epstein and his colleagues a few years ago. Yeah, if you actually click on the bullets there, it may show up each of, oops, and maybe you can't do that, that's fine. Yeah, okay, yeah.
Well.
Don't worry about it, anyhow. That estimated just from coal alone now, there's about $500 billion per year in healthcare costs. And he's afterwards come out and said, you know, this may be an underestimate, you know, because it depends what all you're trying to take into account for that. So, it, you know, I suspect it's certainly going up much higher than that. The drought from last year, the estimates on that were 35 billion. Hurricane Sandy, 65 billion. The two put together were about $100 billion. And for instance, the Gulf oil spill at 40 billion. Okay, go on. Next one. At the national level, what are some of the issues we're really facing? Well, first of all, there's climate change denial, which unfortunately is very tied to the issue of partisan politics. It didn't used to be that way. Some of you may have seen recently where 4 previous EPA administrators under Republican presidents came out and said, this doesn't make sense. You know, we need to believe in good science. It's out there. You know, we can't afford to not do this. This is not a partisan issue. Shouldn't be a partisan issue, but how much weight that's going to carry is unfortunately rather dubious. The fossil fuel corporate structure, just the way things are in our country, is very entrenched. They have very powerful lobbies that are going on. Makes it very hard to compete now with the access they have, especially to those who are getting the major amounts of contributions from the fossil fuel industry. In terms of transportation issues in particular, we have a very automobile-centric society and structure. We've just built our cities around automobiles and access and parking and everything else. Some places, like Madison, are trying to change slowly, but it's really been an uphill battle. And then, so they take the current corporate power structure and monies that they have. They've then been able to get a lot of subsidies that continue to support this activity and are not nearly as friendly than to clean energy policies. Certainly a key thing behind that was the Citizens United decision, which Move to Amend and other organizations are really trying to overturn, and I really think is a key thing. We really need political finance reform in order to, you know, make real headway in this country. Just remembering that a teacher in high school many years ago told me that in the absence of revolution, all systems tend to move to the right. I think it's what we're seeing here. There's also a lack of accountability for environmental threats. I mean, there are oversight agencies, the EPA at the national level, DNR here and in other states. where they are actually given the authority to do these things, they're not following through well, isn't sufficient staff, and generally they are being hamstrung in terms of their activities on all levels. So even where there are regulations there, they're not being followed through, they're not being enforced. When they are enforced, these companies intermittently get sort of slaps on the hand. They've made so much money that if there is a problem, it's better to pay the fine. I mean, when BP can spend $40 billion for an oil spill and not have problems with their solvency, that tells you something in terms of our economy and how they're doing and the amount of money they have. Currently in a lot of places, when you get the green energy through your utility company, you actually pay a surcharge. And yet current cost estimates for power show that wind is at least competitive with fossil fuels in this day and age. There is, in general, which goes along with some of the other things, a very anti-government and regulatory sentiment, which goes along with the fact that a lot of these agencies are being hamstrung. That the EPA can come out with studies that will show that the benefit-cost ratio of the regulations they're putting in place, such as for mercury, will vastly go beyond the costs of those regulations. But they're routinely ignored. One of our senators in the state, Ron Johnson, was one of the prime deniers in saying the EPA is going to cost us huge amounts of money and huge amounts of jobs, and it's stuff all funded by the petroleum industry and the National Chamber of Commerce. And again, some of this still goes that their perceptions that clean energy is more costly. Well, certainly if you took into account the full cost, it wouldn't be. In Wisconsin, some concerns, just to let you know what's going on in this state, for instance, and certainly I know Colorado and California are much more proactive in terms of clean energy. But our renewable portfolio standards that the utility companies must meet is only at 10%, and almost all of them have met that already. Gives them little incentive to say, okay, we'll put in more clean energy. There is a very nice program in the state called Focus on Energy, which provides stimulus for clean energy solutions and energy and so on, energy efficiency and that sort of thing. That funding has been cut under the current administration drastically, and they're now hamstringing some of the current funds that are out there. And they also, we had a company, a corporation in the state that was dealing with clean energy and knew the connections and everything else, and they farmed that out, took it away from them and farmed it out to a company out of state. We have a governor, legislature, and public service commission that's very antagonistic towards clean energy, stopping a wind farm recently, trying to undo siting rules. We've got a Republican legislator who's trying to reduce the renewable energy standard, even though it wouldn't make any difference, but it's just so anti-clean energy. We have a surplus of energy generating capacity in the state. The industry and utilities have for years been estimating, if you look at their projections when they say we need more power or what we should charge, the energy is just going to continue climbing in terms of demand. Well, that's not necessarily true. So with the latest plant that came online in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, which is a very large one, even though there have been some shut down, we actually have a surplus of generating capacity. And I think last year, at least part of the year, it was operating like at 16% of capacity on a brand new, highly efficient plant, because it has those controls and one thing and another. It's more expensive to operate. And hence goes to the next one, that the electric supply is controlled here in this area of the country by the Midwest Independent System Operators. So actually where you get your electricity from is not determined directly by your utility. They supposedly buy it from certain places, but that distribution is actually determined by MISO in terms of saying, okay, this is where the cheapest power is right now, this is where it's coming from. So actually we're removed from control of our own electric supplies. For instance, with Madison Gas and Electric here, they have a surcharge on their green power program, which had dropped at one point, is now up to 4 cents a kilowatt hour based on our rates, which actually tie it to the cost of coal, by the way, which is really interesting, because if you're on clean power, you don't want to be paying for the coal. Oh no, we need this for base power, you got to pay for that. And then they tack on extra charges somehow. The utilities are guaranteed returns for selling their energy. Now, there are things, I think California has played a little bit of decoupling in terms of the energy rates. But basically, on the one hand, we're trying to tell them, you know, these fossil fuels are bad, we want you to use less. And then we tell them, if you sell more, you're going to make more money. so you know which they're going to do. A couple things that have to do with transportation. Here in Wisconsin, we were trying to go to regional transit authorities that allow transit systems to go beyond municipal borders. We had that starting to be in place. The current administration rescinded that authority. And it was a local control issue, and they took away local control. Just because they didn't like it. There was also some fund levying authority with that. Oh no, we can't burden our citizens with your funding authority. So they didn't even give local citizens the choice whether they wanted that. Despite the fact, by the way, that mass transit is much cheaper to run, even for municipality, than is building roads and everything. And finally, they've also taken away money from transit. They've been trying to take transit out of the transportation fund here in this state, of all things. And they're putting more into building new roads when there's not even enough money to maintain the old roads. So it's really going backwards. They're also removing, it's also a question of access for a lot of people here, which is another story beyond just the energy concerns, but there are democracy issues going on here too, especially when you talk about transit. Subsidies. Oil companies are making record profits, and yet we need to subsidize them? I don't get that. Leases for land where a lot of the energy is acquired from are given out far below market values and are basically giveaways. You know, if we're going to do this, they should at least pay the way for what they're getting, but they're making profit off our public lands. When it comes to transportation, there's far more subsidies, even at the federal level, that encourages road building rather than transit. Again, the car makers, the oil companies, they all have a much more powerful lobby than do the bus companies. And fossil fuels also then, by virtue, get far more subsidies than clean energy. One thing that, for instance, wind has is called a production tax credit, which gives a certain added incentive to putting in wind. But, you know, companies need certainty for the future. That was only renewed at the very end of last year and only renewed for another year. So if you're planning a wind farm, which may be 2-3 years out, do you know if you're going to get it? That's not a good policy. There are some incentives that are working a bit. There is a 30% federal tax credit for solar. There are some state and local programs. Actually, the Sierra Club is just starting an incentive program here too, and they have that out in California and some other areas to help homeowners get solar. And for instance, there is up to a $7,500 rebate for electric or hybrid cars, which is a little bit of incentive to do those. Next one. Let's talk about natural gas. Half the emissions of coal, I say ostensibly. Now, coal also has other problems besides just CO2, so we need to acknowledge that in terms of environmental concerns and damage. But the reason I say ostensibly, a lot of times when they've been doing analysis of fossil fuels, or nuclear for that matter, they look at burning it, and that's it. Well, where does it come from? And what happens to it afterwards? I mean, let's talk about life cycle when we talk about these things. And one of the things, aside from all the problems with fracking and so on, that I'm not going to go into, especially here, there is leakage of methane when you are, extracting the gas from the ground. How much is uncertain. I've generally heard it's probably fairly low, but there are indications that may be a lot higher. In North Dakota, with all the shale and so on, apparently they're burning vast quantities that are just going up in the air. So they're creating, and that's probably not being counted because they're burning it and not using it for energy production. Which makes no sense at all. But the advent of fracking has led to a real explosion of natural gas use. It's just made it so much more accessible, and the little bit strange thing, we'll have to see how this plays out economically, is actually these companies, it's very questionable whether they're making any money or perhaps even losing money right now in the hopes of making a lot more money for the future. So there is a real issue here that the chickens may come home to roost on that, and they may fall on their face, but we haven't seen that happen yet. Certainly with fracking, it uses a lot of toxic chemicals. Thanks to Cheney and company, they already got exemption from federal clean water standards, which also means there's no disclosure of the toxic chemicals. So this is a proprietary trade secret. We can't have you messing with our economic profits. but we can mess with your lives and health. And the EPA has really taken a backseat in terms of oversight. They do have some oversight over this and what occurs. And in Wyoming, they actually started 3-4 years ago, at least now, a study in terms of one area where there were chemicals showing up that probably couldn't have come from any other source than the fracking. They did show up, and after 3 years, the EPA released a preliminary study. The company sued them for releasing preliminary results, even though they were quite clear as to what was going on. And since then, the EPA has also decided, oh, well, really, this isn't our bailiwick. We'll just provide a little bit of advice on this, and we'll let the states provide oversight and so on. So you can see that's really going away. The Wisconsin connection, I mean, in one sense, we're lucky we don't have any fossil fuels at all, so at least we don't directly suffer from that, but we do have the wonderful frac sands that are used as part of that toxic mix that goes into the ground and produces the explosion that lets the natural gas escape. And so this is sort of our own form of mountaintop removal, in effect, or mining here that we have about those frac sands. And silica sand, if you know, happens to be a carcinogen. And of course, it blows around all over the place. Next one. I want to talk, oh, that's one thing. Oh, I'm going to have to skip one thing. Anyhow, with Enbridge, you may have heard a lot about that, the Keystone XL, as to what's going on with that. Keystone XL is number 2 on the map over there that is proposed. Their symbology isn't the best here, but anyhow. But even if that doesn't go through, you can see there are pipelines going elsewhere. First of all, there is the pipeline, there are some pipelines, part of Line 61 going through Wisconsin. You see one going to Chicago and then through Michigan. It was in Kalamazoo, Michigan. There was that big spill 3 years ago that still hasn't been properly cleaned up. We did have one in Wisconsin last year. But you can see also some going to Flanagan. There is, I think, a natural gas pipeline looking converting from there to Cushing, which they're building one from Cushing now to Houston currently, so they can, to some extent, circumvent Keystone XL if it doesn't get built. They're also looking to go west. They're looking to go east. They will go any method they can to get that tar sands oil out of here and sell it. Next one, Wallace. Tar sands and pipelines. Tar sands generates twice the CO2 per unit of energy just in the production if you do extracting oil, say in the Mideast or whatever, or from normal oil wells. They've already devastated an area the size of Florida. Tar sands is a very corrosive material. It's much harder on pipelines than other ones. So especially if you're looking at converting a pipeline, it wasn't meant to hold that. A lot of these pipelines have been around here a long time. The one where there was just the demonstration recently at the Straits of Mackinac, that's a 60-year-old pipeline going under the water where there are currents, and some of it's, I think, rather suspended there. And if that goes underwater there, they've got no way to stop it readily and clean it up. So it could be massive catastrophe from that. So anyhow, they're looking to build even more of these pipelines at this point so they can expand their production of the tar sands oil and ship it overseas, so other countries will get the oil, and in the meantime, we get the risk. Enbridge itself has a terrible safety record. I mentioned a couple of things right now also in Fort McKay, Alberta, where some of the central areas. They have an area that started on fire, and they can't figure out how to put it out. It's not a pipeline, it's just an area.
Can I ask you a question on that?
Yeah.
There's also in Alberta, it seems, oil is bubbling up from the ground.
I imagine.
Well, no, this is
Yeah,
a
okay.
fact. It's been
Yeah.
going on for 9 weeks. They won't let anybody, they won't let any reporters in the area.
Oh, yeah.
They don't know where it's coming from. They don't know how to stop it. So, I mean,
Yeah.
again, this is another issue with their lack of transparency and their refusal to have any transparency, period.
Yeah.
I mean, this oil is just bubbling up to the
Yeah.
surface.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually have it linked on my laptop, but you might want to look it up. The Center for Biological Diversity has a video on history of dangerous pipelines or something like that. And it shows, I forget how many years when it started, the last 60 years or so. It's a progressive map just showing where damage has occurred from pipelines, where there have been breaks, and it's both natural gas and oil, and injuries and deaths. And those have occurred too from the pipeline accidents and problems that have occurred. It's a pretty amazing video that just shows that, you know, number of dots growing over time over the whole country. Next one. Peak oil, whatever you want to say in terms of any natural gas. A lot of people ascribe to it. I largely think it is probably a myth. That yes, the supplies we know about that are most readily accessible and how they counted to the things to this point have been tapped. And as they go down in terms of coal and natural gas, it becomes harder to get the remaining parts out. But the point is, prices have gone up, the technology has improved. There are areas that are viable now they wouldn't have counted before. And so, you know, those things may continue. If prices continue to go up, technology, come up, new technologies, areas they said, oh, this well is done. They may be going back in and they could extract from those wells. Plus there's also shale oil and all that sort of thing. So I have no doubt that the ingenuity of industry out here when it comes to extracting fossil fuels can carry us a lot further. How much, I don't know. But that's what we're faced with right now. So I don't place a lot of stock in the issue saying there's a peaking issue going on right now.
Yeah, one of the biggest exports of the United States right now is refined products.
Which means if there's money involved, they'll find a way to do it.
Yeah, it may be, under today's pricing, we
Yeah.
might be in a peak situation, but they can raise prices and, you know.
But that's the thing,
and
you
it's
start running
probably
out,
down-
prices will go up.
Like you say, it's probably down there if they can charge enough for it.
Yeah. I mean, just look what happens if a couple of refineries go out. Prices jump up like nothing. And they've got control over the pricing. So I have little faith that we will run, that's the thing that will get us over the hump in terms of fossil fuels. However, there are opportunities. True costing fossil fuels would be a game changer. One good proposal out there is carbon fee and dividend. Now, it is a form of a tax. The reason I think that it might be palatable, and the Citizens Climate Lobby, who's especially pushing this, is talking about that, is that it returns the money back to the people. It just does it in such a way that, you know, you are in effect taxing the carbon fuels and making the price higher. But you do know, while there hasn't, I don't think they have fought this really hard for the moment, because I don't think it's got enough traction so far that they've had to fight it, and they don't want to put more publicity on it than they need to. So while Citizen Climate Lobby is very hepped up on this, I'd say it's great, but I have my doubts about it getting through. One thing that's always occurred to me.
James Hansen really likes that, though.
Excuse me?
James Hansen really likes
The carbon fee and dividend? Yeah, I like it. I like it. And it may be one of the most palatable things, and I'd say, let's go for it. But whether we'll get through, especially as partisan as things are right now, I have my doubts. Now, one slight hope I have on some of these things, which I didn't think to put on here, is that as we get more severe storms, severe climate events, or more major spills, there is only a certain tolerance in the public for that. So you hate to see disasters happen, but there are bigger disasters coming. So maybe some smaller ones would help.
We have a clean, renewable source of fuel that isn't going to end. It's so obvious people are overlooking it. It's methane gas. We could cap our own sewage plants and extract the methane to run our cars and other things.
That would provide some of it. You know, that would help. But capturing it all and going through all that, it would provide some, but not nearly enough. I mean, actually, the thing people say, and I didn't really mention nuclear here, is, yeah, I do favor nuclear in one sense. 93 million miles from here, we got the best power plant we need. Otherwise, I didn't mention nuclear, but there are three main slams. It's too expensive. Life cycle, it is probably not much better than natural gas in terms of CO2 emissions. And the third thing is the safety and issue. We don't have any permanent storage sites for this spent fuel.
Could you say more about the CO2 emissions from nuclear? I'm not aware of that.
Yes, when the nuclear plant is running, that doesn't really emit much in the way of CO2 emissions. But when you have to go through all the extraction, refining process of the uranium, and shipping it and everything else, and building the plants, the full life cycle cost, it's
there's a lot of CO2 emissions associated
Yes.
with refining the fuel.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that's my last slide. So anyhow, but anyhow, we've all been hearing a lot about Obamacare and fighting that. Well, here's another reason maybe to say it. You want healthcare reform, get us off fossil fuels. You can lower healthcare costs dramatically just by doing that. So it's a game changer right there, and I haven't heard much about that, but it would really be a big thing. While the EPA has not been as proactive as we'd like to see, the regulations on mercury and capping CO2 emissions and so on, anything we can do that will increase the cost of fossil fuel is going to start being a game changer, because, for instance, the rest of the world is becoming more advanced on energy solutions, clean energy solutions. We are moving there too. And as fossil fuels wane and the clean energy industry grows, they will have more power in terms of promoting that end of things. And that is a good transition from where I'm at, talking about where we can go with clean energy solutions.
So you're done?
I'm done.
Okay.
That's my last one. Any quick questions or comments while you're switching over?
Yeah, I have one. One of your charts, a graph showed
Yeah.
Current, it was a timeline, but the current
Yeah.
day it showed CO2 emissions from coal
Mhm.
being twice as much roughly as CO2 emissions from natural gas.
Mm-hmm.
It's really surprising. I mean, I would have thought natural gas would be quite lower, plus, I mean, we're not using that much yet of natural gas.
Oh, we are, actually.
Are we?
Yeah, we
Is
are.
it for space heating or building?
Well, not only heating, but even for electricity now. Actually, there are a number of coal plants that have been shut down. The Sierra Club, along with organizations, has been responsible for shutting down something like 170 coal power plants. over the last
nationwide.
Do you have a
170.
guess at how much energy we get from generating electricity via natural gas versus coal?
Yeah. The latest stats, coal went down to 37%, natural gas was 42%. In the last quarter, I think that reversed. There was, natural gas's prices have been very interesting. They went actually down to $2 and some a million BTUs, went back up to $4.10 a million, or $4.10 a million BTUs. In the last numbers I looked at, it was back around 370 per million BTUs. So electric utilities tend to switch back and forth depending on which is the cheapest. I have a slide on, in Wisconsin, the coal plants that we've shut down. So.
Yeah, well, I just mentioned quickly that I mentioned MISO here in this area of the country. There are similar systems elsewhere in the country. So a lot of cases, wherever they get the cheapest energy from, and if natural gas has become cheaper. It used to be natural gas was used for peaking power plants primarily. Now it is a very major power source.
Okay, thanks.
You want to ask him a question, or shall I
Yes,
begin?
I do. I heard a lot about renewable energy as far as development, but it seems like there hasn't been that much lately, because the tax structure is put in big disincentive simply because oil companies don't want it. It's bad business.
Yeah,
And we need to get people elected in our government who will stop trying to stifle the creation of clean energy, especially when our ozone is about to make a big hole in both poles. And people don't realize just how dangerous and serious that is, but we're running out of time. If we don't get the right people elected, we won't have a future, none of us.
It's coming. Anyhow, Wallace will talk more about clean energy here. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, in Colorado, we have City of Boulder going after investment utility to kind of create municipality because our utility is not providing clean energy. and they gave them time, so they are at times to put them out of the city. But they are having a lot of problems. They, Excel Energy going door to door and offer refrigerator and appliances to the resident, trying to change. But
Yeah.
I have one question. My question is, we are in Denver and we don't have city council, city council of Boulder. Our city councils are corrupt. So the way we are doing it, we're using a program called Optimizer, which is, and we can calculate the energy up to net zero and go retrofit homes. You know, and we have an intention of going to 25,000 homes and create a business and retrofit these homes to net zero energy, so I bring their profitability down. So I want to know, can we do that legally? Are they going to come after us? Right now, Excel Energy is after the whole state trying to ban the solar, rooftop solar,
Yeah,
you know.
I'm going to talk about that struggle.
Okay.
You know, Don kind of gave me the frame of talking about how clean energy offers hope, and it does, but we're going to have a lot of struggle in the next 10 to 15 years for that to be realized. In preparing my presentation, I was assuming mostly a Wisconsin audience, and how many of you are from Wisconsin here? Okay, so mostly not. I'm skipping a lot of slides, which means that this is not too relevant. But just so you know a little bit about the major organizations that I work with. So, Don has pretty much hit these points. There is a definite opportunity. The clean energy economy is the fastest growing sector of the economy. You get about 3 times as many jobs per $1 million invested in efficiency and renewable energy as you get from investing in fossil fuels. Okay, this is some of the factual items about 5 plants that have, Sierra Club's been instrumental in getting them to either switch from coal or shut them down. And we've had a big fight over siting wind turbines in Wisconsin. In fact, when Scott Walker and Republican allies took over the state government, about 400 megawatts of wind farms disappeared, which is on the order of $600 million in investment that was zapped. Okay, I'm going to go on. Okay, next slide.
I'm sorry, can you elaborate on why there are 3 times as many jobs?
All I can say is that I found that in a study by reputable economists. That was 15.7 jobs per million from clean energy investments versus, as I recall, 5.3 full-time jobs per million invested in coal burning technology.
Well, what we can say is that in part 2 is that the large centralized power plants don't take as many workers and so on. That's the nature of them, whereas a lot of clean energy is very decentralized in terms of what it is. It takes more, especially local installation, and does take some maintenance, but you're paying for maintenance instead of paying for fossil fuels.
I'm sorry, I don't really, I can't spell the study off the top of my head. I'm very sure that I read it.
But it's also local besides being more.
A little bit more detail on focus on energy, which is a public benefits fund, and it has done very well at promoting efficiency and helping to support a small but rather nice industry of solar energy installers. And I got started in 2001. 24,000 jobs is not bad.
They mentioned too, there was also a study that showed there was $2.3 return for every dollar invested through focus on energy.
Okay. But we have these challenges. The utilities already are virtually at that 10% renewable energy requirement. We've talked to you a bit about the political climate. Interesting that black text doesn't show worth a damn, but I listed the precise the 4 wind projects that were canceled. And we do have the surplus of power. Next slide. Don talked about the most efficient new plant is only running 16% of capacity. But they got a deal where they get paid whether they produce electricity or not, which produces this kind of numbers per megawatt hour of electricity. You know, it's just huge.
Such a deal we have for you.
You know, for comparison, I put up the Glacier Hills Wind Farm, which went into service at about the most expensive time in the history of wind farms in Wisconsin. And even at $85 a megawatt hour, which is relatively expensive, it looks great by comparison. So, of course, our challenge in trying to win this argument is to speak in simple science-based terms about the urgent need to address climate change with clean energy solutions that will get us off of the huge carbon emissions from burning coal. Just one point, the clean energy opponents love to harp on the theme of they claim that wind turbines have health issues, which is proven by no peer-reviewed science, but many, many local TV news programs. But they ignore the known health impacts of burning coal and the disasters of climate change. So, policies that would help everybody, in particular in Wisconsin, enhancing the renewable energy standard and setting up net metering and payback things, payback structures that economically encourage it. One of these things that really helped Germany take off were the clean contracts, which for some reason has been given the name of feed-in tariffs. Don't confuse it with agricultural feed. In this case, feed-in means feed-in electricity to the grid, and a tariff is just another name for a rate. And if you have a definite length for a contract, you're going to get 15 cents a kilowatt hour for 15 years or something like that. It sets up an economic structure where it's relatively easy to get, or much easier to get financing if we're doing something like installing solar equipment. Also, in states that have renewable energy standards, where they've had a solar carve-out, let's say the standard's 20%, if 0.5% of that has come from solar, this is the case in Ohio. It has been an enormous boon to the solar industry in Ohio. Wisconsin lags. Most of you aren't from Wisconsin, so we'll go on, although I want to say that there's a real economic impact. Just by comparison, since we've had the Walker administration, wind power is almost totally stopped in Wisconsin. So you have surrounding states installing hundreds of megawatts of wind power. In Wisconsin, 5 megawatts. Most of that was put in by Johnson & Johnson or S.C. Johnson?
I think.
S.C. Johnson.
I think.
Which means that job creation in Wisconsin from clean energy is almost the lowest in the nation. So it has a big economic impact. And if we can get a revitalized renewable economic standard in this state, and there are other states struggling with this too. Kentucky, for instance, is fighting over that. And the states that have passed such, Ohio and North Carolina, interestingly, are leaders, they have seen a lot of jobs created. And, you know, the money is good. If you just consider that current wind farms are pumping 1.3 million in income to farmers and 1.6 million in tax revenues to local governments. And I don't think there's any other crop where you can get $4,000 a year from a quarter acre of farmland. Mentioned Germany is a leader. Germany has a climate similar to Wisconsin. I believe Wisconsin actually has better energy per meter squared solar insolation. Wisconsin imports over 2.5 billion. I got the latest numbers available from the state energy office, which is
12.5 million.
no, it's 12.86 billion. But you know, that's a lot of money being shipped out of state to out-of-state fossil fuel companies. Clean, local, renewable energy is economically a lot better. Some people argue that renewable portfolio standards are dreadfully expensive. It ain't so, folks. Before the administration switched, the Public Service Commission here did a study which found that they thought it would be 3% more if we had a 25% by 2020, 25 by 25 policy for supplying electricity. Yes, sir.
There's a farmer in Wausau who converted his farm to run on cow manure, methane gas, and he sells so much energy to the grid that he is not only getting money from those cows, the milk and that, he's making more money now by the electricity he's selling to the electric company. And our cities could do that as well. Like, I know you don't think poo-poo, that's poo, and it is. But if we could cap our sewage treatment plants, we would get enough energy to not only run our homes, we would make fossil fuels obsolete.
There's certainly, you know, anaerobic digesters for manure, creating methane, which is a burnable fuel. It's a viable strategy. I'm not as comfortable that it's a clean renewable energy because that combustion process is still going to generate nitrogen oxides. And
the technology exists. The only reason is it hasn't been done. People don't have the guts.
it is being done.
We have some here in Dane County.
Not that much.
Yeah, Dane County has a methane digester that's using the manure from 3 dairy farms that's operating reasonably successfully. And Focus on Energy is now putting most of its money into manure digesters.
Yeah, 2 quick things. It still does have CO2 when you burn it. And second of all, on the study they did, they probably did not include the benefits of an economic multiplier effect from the money that would be kept in the state that has jobs here.
One other point about renewable portfolio standard or renewable energy standard, if it's coupled with efficiency, you would expect that bills would go down. You know, just our renewable standard, a very slight uptick, you include an efficiency component, you can expect bills to go down. Wisconsin has an enormous potential for offshore wind in the Great Lakes. And this is a tremendous potential for job creation also. It's something like for every, as I recall, for every 1,000 megawatts of offshore wind, you can expect 1,000 construction jobs lasting 2 years. You get maintenance jobs. It's more expensive to install, but the wind resource is very good. It could be an economic bonanza for Wisconsin or Michigan. I know there's been some interest in Michigan also in offshore wind. Tremendous potential. If we could get policies to make it go, it would be wonderful.
Sure has been a bonanza in Denmark for the farmers.
Yeah. Wind power is generally doing very well. US DOE put out a report last week, and we've got some very nice statistics. It was 43% of all new US electric generation capacity in 2012. Bigger turbines are improving wind farm performance. Oh, I should pop back. Yeah, that wind power more than 4% of total electric supply, and with solar growing exponentially. Renewables are coming, even though they're still at the approximately 5% level now. But the falling wind turbine prices have lowered installed cost. You saw that earlier slide where at $85 a megawatt hour. Recent contracts have been in the 20s. It just has gone way down, and in the central Midwest, they've been averaging around $32 a megawatt hour, and as I say, one recently was purchase power agreement was consummated in North Dakota that was in the 20s. It's great. And as you probably all know, solar costs are going down, 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 and down, and down. You know, it was like $60, $70 a watt in 1980, and a lot of people now say they can install solar for $3 a watt. Next slide. You know, it's continued to drop. A significant part of this has been that the Chinese flooded the market with low-priced solar modules. But one should be very careful of the quality of Chinese modules, is what the installers tell me. But the price has gone down, and that's great. And that trend is expected to continue. Sierra Club is doing its part. You guys aren't from Madison, so we won't talk about this. Onwards. But it really seems like a major change is coming. A grid-delivered electricity with the rising cost of fossil fuel and the tightening, finally the Clean Air Act of 1990 is being enforced. Grid-delivered electricity prices are going up. Solar costs are projected to continue dropping. That 8% per year may be pessimistic. It may drop faster. So rooftop solar is going to cost less than grid-delivered electricity in 10 years or so. So, of course, who would oppose nice, clean, renewable energy? Well, misguided big electric utilities who have been, I think, actively lobbying all across the U.S. They fear that the distributed solar photovoltaics, quoting from an Edison Institute report, will burn down the utility industry. They want to cling to the centralized generation module we have. Now, there's some very distinct advantages to having dispersed distributed generation.
How can we not to get into trouble with them? I mean, do we go through PUC, Public Utility Commissions? How do we go and fight this battle? Because
basically, at this point in time, it's state laws. The battles are primarily, I think, state legislatures, and some states, public utility commissions have been given some jurisdiction over it. Both California and Minnesota are doing in-depth studies of the comparative costs of distributed generation and solar with the centralized generation. So it's a very lively topic in a number of jurisdictions. And as I say, I think this is the great struggle of the next 10 years, is this battle for distributed generation.
so where do we start?
Can I make a
She's
suggestion?
eager to speak to that.
Yeah, I wanted to say that. In the 60s, anti-war movement days, a long time ago for some, not for others. But, you know, we did a lot of teach-ins. We had teach-ins all over the country, at universities, at schools. We made slideshows, we made films, we sent them all over the place. What I don't see the environmental movement doing is I don't see them talking to the people. I don't see them educating the people. I love Sierra Clipper, what they do. Great, 170 coal plants are offline, blah, blah, blah. However, I don't see that people understand, except for those of us at this conference. I'm simply encouraging, hold on, sir. I'm simply making a statement. My problem with environmental movement is there is no concerted effort coming together on the part of all these different organizations to really upgrade people's information and connecting the dots about the climate crisis.
Yes.
And it's not just, it isn't just the polar bear and the blah blah and so on. It is all of it combined. The web of life is under threat. And if we do not educate people to understand how it's in their interest to give a damn, we're all going to go off the cliff like a bunch of lemmings. And we might have 10 years, we might not.
By God, we ought to give you a megaphone.
Yeah, but you don't, the
But
thing
no, I'm
is, you
serious.
don't-
Well, no, I agree with you.
Yeah, state legislature is not an option.
No, it's an
Because
option, it's an option if you have an educated populace.
Correct.
If you don't have an educated populace, it's not an
Somebody else get
option.
in here too.
Sorry.
I must say that a few
Quickly.
years ago, Japan, in the industries and businesses, they set their thermostats at 82 degrees. And I think Chile's copied them. I've copied them. I've reduced my energy by about more than 50% in my house by changing the thermostats. I mean, it's freezing to me it's freezing in here. We don't need these big colleges, schools, and everything with such low coal emissions.
I think that, you know, really, I think you make a good point, and I think that the effort is beginning. It's somewhat nascent, but you know, the organizations that I'm in touch with, to me, it seems like 350.org is trying, but they really haven't figured it out yet. The Yale Center for Climate Communication says that their polling shows that there's 17 million people who are really upset about climate change and want to do something about it, but they haven't figured out how to connect with each other and to work on it. You know, the Tea Party only has about 250,000 active people, and they're having an enormous impact. We got to figure out how to get that 17 million folks connected. I very much believe that climate change is the greatest challenge facing our generation. There's going to be a lot of suffering in the coming century if we don't mitigate climate change. And you know, if we can get clean energy going, that's an excellent mitigation strategy. Shut down the coal plants, stop emitting. I mean, states that I know statistics for are Missouri emits 90 million tons of CO2 a year, Kentucky emits 90 million tons of CO2 a year. I think Wisconsin is comparable. You know, it's a struggle, but we need to do it. This chap has been trying to talk. Well, let's let him talk, and then we'll come back to you.
Thank you.
There is an untapped source of energy that could supply the entire East Coast with enough energy.
What is it?
It would need fossil fuel. It's a Gulf Stream. I mean, this thing is a river that is running, that is larger than all the rivers in the world combined. All we gotta do is set turbines there. The Bay of Fundy would be one good spot, and this is a source of energy that's going literally untouched. So we could develop that energy there. We wouldn't have to worry about fuel for New
Just
York or
quickly.
Philadelphia or any of the East Coast cities.
Just another quick point,
Yeah.
if I could. What I'm suggesting, great idea. Hey, we need the political will. Where do we get the political will? An educated populace. I'm simply suggesting, throwing this out here, and I will at every workshop I go to, we need a climate summit of organizations in this country that are committed to climate change, that can develop a policy, hopefully, they could go about educating people all across the country, strategically about how to move us forward. That's my suggestion.
We need that kind of thing for sure. And I see I see 350.org starting to reach out and a lot more. The Citizens Climate Lobby here in Wisconsin is quite effective in trying to educate people about climate change. Their program is let's have a carbon fee with a dividend to all tax-paying citizens. In my opinion, anything like that will be greatly helpful, and they're working on the education piece. Certainly Sierra Club is doing everything it can to educate people. You know, just here in Wisconsin, the chapter was on Mike 91 radio show yesterday afternoon, doing her best to broadcast the message. Yeah, you've got a point. Like I say, I think we should give you a megaphone, but I'll let you in the back row talk.
Yes, many people think the only option is through legislations and politics. My group are off-grids, and we have found a solution, and we have found the material to do our own homes, you know, get it to net zero. We want the steps to go and see how we can go around the law, not breaking the law, going around the law and implement this. And I would like to know what are our obstacles. You know, I know our utilities, but for that, where do we go? Do we go to the utility companies? You know, do we go to public utility commissions? You know, and our legislators, I don't know about your legislators, ours are corrupt, and they paid by the utility companies, and we do not want to go that route.
I think everywhere the legislators who set the rules for this kind of thing are greatly influenced by the electric utilities. Rural electric cooperatives are a major influence, and there are groups working on the public power problem. I've been involved in rural electric co-ops in a couple of states, and generally rural electric co-ops these days are run by a good old boys club that's been in power for 30 years. But when you get a reform candidate or two elected to the board of directors of a rural electric co-op, then they open up to doing a lot more energy and doing renewable energy. And in some places it has just had a wonderful influence. Usually they've got the election set up rigged, so it's very hard, but it's a fight worth fighting. At the moment, the National Rural Electric Co-op Association just hired an incredibly right-wing congressperson, Joanne Emerson, to be their executive director, which is like,
Of course.
progress very much in the wrong direction. But essentially, these rules are set by state legislatures. You know, off-grid is great, and certainly net zero homes, schools, whatever, are terrific too. I guess I should mention before everybody starts to leak out, we got a bunch of literature about the municipalities that the Wisconsin Sierra Club is pushing. And for those of you who are from Wisconsin, a major wind farm hearing next Wednesday at the PSC, the Highland Wind Farm. There's a rumor that the PSC may only let utility folks speak for the first day. We don't know you, but reportedly the opponents are sending in busloads of opponents to this wind farm hearing. And it's been a 2-year battle, and they've gone through the PSC process, and Scott Walker's office has obviously influenced it. This is the little flyer about that over there on the table. And since we're 5 minutes in the end, I think I should open it up to Nancy's statement.
Well, I would just like to say, in designing the Earth Democracy Conference, I've been working with Jill Stein, and we've tried to create conferences, panels that are framing out the major issues of the climate issue, climate justice, and in reframing to not just look at the climate issue as bringing down CO2 or just some of the renewable policies, but to really reframe the climate movement as a movement of human rights, civil rights, labor rights, and earth rights. And also to link that to the consequences of not getting to renewables fast enough in terms of the impact on people in increasing warfare and struggles over resources and the consequence of climate impact, and also the impact on the planet. And what we're really trying to build to is this 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock Saturday afternoon discussion among all the panelists and the audience to really look at next stage, the next steps to the next stage. And what you're recommending is what's being discussed now by a number of groups and a number of people. And there will be an announcement on Saturday at 2. In that discussion, 2 to 4, there'll be an announcement about what some of the next stages are, steps are going to be to the next stage. So you're exactly right that there is a real sense that we have to move forward fast, and we have to really think of the climate problem or issue in a much broader way to build a really diverse,
That's reassuring.
to really build a diverse movement. So look at your program on
I'll
the
be
Earth
there.
Democracy, and
Thank you.
there's some really good information in here. I think Saturday morning it's the panel on enacting an ecologically sustainable economy. So part of the issue is not just climate, but part of it is system change that will lead us to a different kind of economy.
Absolutely.
So we tried to structure these sessions to really lay out the foundations, both in terms of sort of ideology, principles,
Yeah.
and practical hand-on.
I
And so-
appreciate all that, and I didn't mean to sound antagonistic or derogatory.
No, I think your sense of urgency is perfectly well
I don't know.
taken.
I don't know
Yeah,
if
I mean-
it's counterproductive or
No,
not.
no.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of different avenues, and Wallace was right in answering about, Colorado and so on, and you really have to look where the opportunities are, but some of it may be stepping back. You were hitting education, yes, but look at the audience. I mean, we've been out there educating people a long time, but with the information, a lot of people are not listening well enough, and also it's become very polarized. So part of what's going to happen during this conference is other ways of looking at things or framing things, and maybe it's also partly connecting with people on a very human level, so you find common ground where you can discuss these issues. Because there are a lot of people who are so antagonistic, they won't listen to a lot of this stuff, or they see clean energy as a communist plot or something of that nature. And it's
Listen, we
not.
were called communists in the anti-war movement in the 60s, and we still
Yes,
move
we were.
forward. So I just don't buy that we're educating
It
people.
still wasn't the same situation, and the war, there are
Every
things to learn
environmental group has
from.
their little issue, and it
Excuse me.
isn't working.
There are things to learn from that,
You haven't
but
been
we
out
are
there.
also
Yes,
not.
I have.
We are not in the same situation fully either. So I
Yeah.
think we need to acknowledge that, and that there are things we need to do in that. Certainly learn from the past and so on. But
So, you should.
I just had a light bulb go off. I mean, the Green Party needs to be known as coalition builders.
Right.
And I don't think we have maybe don't have the reputation yet, but, I mean, that's where we need to go.
Right.
But it's not just the Green Party. Let me make one other point connected to that. if I
Okay,
might.
okay.
And that is, we talk about all these different things, including the clean energy. Well, really, the Tea Party and the Libertarians ought to be jumping on board with this. This is local control when you're talking solar. They have painted the government as the enemy out here, when really, I don't want to just paint them as the enemy, but I think a lot who are in opposition of where we need to go here are the corporations. And if they start seeing them as the ones who are standing in the way of the sort of life they want to live, they should be on our side of the aisle on this with clean energy.
Can I just make a little tiny statement?
Now, I want to say something. Do you know anything about community solar?
Yeah, it's a very promising idea, and again, to some extent, getting the legal structure that allows it can be a problem. But the idea of a group of people can come together and raise some capital and jointly do a solar farm that then they all get the benefits from. It's a wonderful idea, and it has happened in some jurisdictions. I'd have to do
But
research.
again, it's probably what state law would allow in terms of
It can be, but there are all sorts of avenues. I mean, the Sierra Club is pursuing one thing here, they mentioned with their solar program, but you can certainly, a lot of places do buying collectives. We are, actually, one thing we didn't mention, I guess, was the clean energy choice, which some places have. In other words,
It's a Wisconsin-specific issue.
well, no, the general issue goes beyond that other places are doing, and we heard from Danny Kennedy of Sungevity Solar at the Midwest Renewable Energy Fair here in June, that in California and other places, third parties can buy the solar for your house and lease the system back to you, and they, you know, so it's a win-win. But that's sort of being prevented here in Wisconsin and some other places. So that is not quite
third-party
solar,
leasing
but
idea is very good in that then you don't have to cough up $15,000 up front. That you simply make a lease arrangement, you get solar electricity, cut your grid bill. Yeah,
not just home,
that's
businesses.
right. That is
Businesses, yes.
booming in California and Arizona, which is part of why the utilities are making a big fight about it in Arizona.